ready to take your English beyond just getting by, like really master it.
Sounds like a plan.
We've got this deep dive that explores, well, it's like a teacher-student conversation, and they map out how to reach fluency, no matter where you're starting.
Right.
And the best part, it's not just about the rules, the boring stuff. It's about mindset and specific techniques anyone can use.
Exactly. And the conversation starts with the teacher, Mr. Brooks. He's introducing his student, Lily, to something super important.
Oh, what's that?
It's called a growth mindset.
Okay, a growth mindset. What does that even mean when we're talking about learning a new language?
Well, it means understanding that your ability to learn and speak English, it's not fixed. You can always improve with effort. It's not about being, good or bad at languages.
I see.
It's realizing you're on this journey of continuous learning.
This reminds me of when I first started learning Italian. I hit this wall and felt like, forget it, I'll never get past basic phrases.
That happens. Happens to a lot of people. Mr. Brooks, he tells Lily that intelligence, especially when it comes to language, it's something you build, not something you're born with.
So you're not stuck. You just need the right way to go about it.
Exactly.
So even here at the very, very beginning, fluency is like really possible.
Absolutely. And Lily brings up this fear a lot of people have, the worry that you're just not progressing fast enough.
Yeah, I feel that.
Mr. Brooks gives her some advice that applies to anyone, really. Focus on consistency and small wins.
Small wins.
It's a marathon, not a sprint,
That's a great point. It's so easy to get overwhelmed. Like mastering a whole new language.
Yeah.
That's huge. So where do we even start?
He guides Lily through kind of a self-assessment to figure out her level.
Oh, like figuring out where you are on the map before you start the journey.
Exactly. You got to know your starting point.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
So once you've got a general idea of your level, what's next?
For beginners, Mr. Brooks recommends starting with simple sentences and really paying attention to pronunciation.
Okay, that sounds doable. But what about the fear of making mistakes? I know that held me back big time.
Lily brings up this fear too, being worried about sounding silly, making pronunciation errors. Yeah. Mr. Brooks has a really cool suggestion that listen to and repeat phrases from, slower podcasts or children's shows.
It's like training wheels for your accent.
Exactly. You can break down the sounds, practice without feeling like, oh my God, there's too much grammar and vocabulary.
So we've got the right mindset. We figured out where we are. We're working on pronunciation. What's next? How do we build like a real foundation?
Mr. Brooks is really big on mastering the basics, basic grammar, everyday vocabulary.
Okay, but isn't there a risk like you just memorize rules and then don't actually use them?
That's a good point. And Lily worries about that too, forgetting the rules when she actually tries to speak.
Oh, I know that feeling. Like brain freeze in a real conversation.
Yeah, Mr. Brooks has a great tip. Practice speaking simple sentences out loud every day.
Even if you're just talking to yourself.
Exactly. It helps make the rules, really sink in.
So it's about making the language like part of your life, not just something you study.
Right. He also says to try watching videos for beginners, reading easy stuff, and keeping a journal, just to keep practicing.
Okay, so we're building this foundation, but then at some point, we got to actually speak, right? I think that's the hardest part for most people.
Definitely. And that's what stage 4 of the dialogue is all about. Mr. Brooks encourages Lily to practice speaking regularly, even if it's just for a few minutes, every day.
That feels less scary than I thought. But still, what about that fear of making mistakes in front of other people?
Lily's got the same fear. And Mr. Brooks offers this perspective shift. I think you'll appreciate it. Focus on communicating, not being perfect.
That takes the pressure off. It's about getting your ideas across, even if you mess up a word or two.
Exactly. He suggests starting with super simple dialogues, asking someone about their day, talking about weekend plans.
Those are good starting points. And if you don't have anyone to talk to?
He suggests, get this, talking to yourself in the mirror.
In the mirror.
Might sound strange, but it helps you get comfortable forming sentences. Can even help with pronunciation, body language.
You're basically becoming your own conversation partner. So what about pronunciation? Any specific tips for that?
This is where the conversation gets into, how to really sound natural. Mr. Brooks tells Lily to focus on certain sounds that are often tricky for English learners. He even has this exercise for the th sound, putting your tongue between your teeth while you practice.
I'm actually trying that right now. It feels different.
But it works. Mr. Brooks also talks about intonation and stress, how you emphasize words in a sentence.
Right.
He suggests listening to native speakers and noticing which words they stress. You can do this watching movies, listening to podcasts, even just eavesdropping on conversations.
It's like the music of the language. But honestly, those little changes in stress, they're hard to even notice sometimes, let alone copy.
I know. And for that, Mr. Brooks has this technique called shadowing.
Shadowing. Tell me more. What's that?
Okay, imagine you're listening to a native speaker, right? And then immediately repeat what they say, trying to match their tone, their rhythm, even their pauses.
You're like their pronunciation shadow.
Yeah. Might feel silly at first, but it's so effective. It helps you get a more natural accent and at the same time improves your listening.
Wow, that's cool. I got to try that. So we're shadowing. Where does reading fit into all of this?
Mr. Brooks is a big fan of reading. He says it really helps expand your vocabulary and you see all kinds of sentence structures.
But what about those times when you're reading and you hit a word you just don't know? It's so discouraging.
Lily has that problem too. Mr. Brooks's advice. First, try to guess the meaning from the context.
Like a word detective.
Exactly. If that doesn't work, look it up, write it down, review it later. The more you read, the easier it gets.
So you're actively working with the text, not just reading it passively.
That's it. He also recommends reading out loud. To practice pronunciation, fluency. Pay attention to that intonation and stress we talked about.
It's like a workout for your voice. What about writing? Does Mr. Brooks think that's important too?
Absolutely. Writing helps you express yourself more clearly, and it makes you think about grammar. Mr. Brooks suggests keeping a daily journal, even just a few sentences a day.
So using English regularly, no matter how, is really the key, huh? Speaking, listening, reading, writing.
You got it. And this brings us to a big step in the dialogue, going from beginner to intermediate.
Ooh, things are getting more challenging. What does that look like, moving to that intermediate level?
Mr. Brooks says the focus shifts to understanding and creating more complex sentences. It's about moving past those basic phrases.
So no more "my name is" sentences.
Right. He emphasizes learning different tenses, talk about the past, present, future.
Ah, yes, those English tenses. Always a struggle. How do we tackle those?
He tells Lily to keep learning new vocabulary, but now focus on learning words in context, like reading news articles, short stories, even novels.
That makes sense. It's one thing to memorize a word from a list, but seeing it used in real life, that's different.
Totally. And to get fluent and practice thinking critically, Mr. Brooks suggests trying debates or discussions.
That sounds a little scary, but also really helpful.
It is. It makes you think on your feet. Say what you think, use English in a real way, not just from a textbook.
We're leveling up what's waiting for us at the advanced stage of this whole journey.
That's where we'll pick up in part 2. We'll get into mastering those idioms and phrasal verbs, tackling tougher grammar, and exploring all those little things that separate, good English from truly fluent English.
Welcome back. We left off talking about, well, getting to that advanced stage of fluency.
That's right. And I'm ready to hear more. What does it actually take to get there?
Well, Mr. Brooks brings up something really important for advanced English. Something that can make you sound, well, more natural, more like a native speaker. Okay, what is it?
It's idioms.
Ah, idioms. Those phrases that, don't always make sense if you think about them literally. I remember when I first started learning English, idioms were so confusing.
Yeah, they trip up a lot of learners. Mr. Brooks explains that idioms are these phrases. They have a meaning that's different from the actual words in them.
Can you give us an example, like one that English learners often struggle with?
Sure. How about kick the bucket? That actually means to die, but if you just think about the words themselves, it sounds pretty strange.
Yeah. You'd be wondering why someone's kicking a bucket. So how do you even begin to understand all these idioms and use them correctly?
Mr. Brooks says to start by learning a few common ones, just a few at a time. And pay attention to how they're used, like in books, movies, conversations.
So it's about recognizing them in real life, figuring out what they mean in that specific situation.
Exactly. And he tells Lily to try using them herself. Even if it feels a little awkward at first, the more you use them, the more natural they'll become.
It's like adding some personality to your language.
I like that. And along with idioms, Mr. Brooks says phrasal verbs are super important too.
Phrasal verbs, those are always a puzzle for me. Can you remind us why they're so tricky?
So phrasal verbs, they're verbs made up of like 2 or more words, usually a verb and a preposition or an adverb. And the tricky part is the meaning isn't always clear just by looking at the individual words.
Can you give us an example, like a phrasal verb that has a bunch of different meanings?
Pick up is a good one. It can mean to lift something, to learn something, to collect someone, even to improve. It all depends on the context.
Yeah, that's what makes them so hard. It's like having to learn a whole new vocabulary within a vocabulary.
It can feel that way. Mr. Brooks says the best way is to learn them in context, just like with idioms. Pay attention to how they're used in different situations.
So it's understanding how the meaning changes based on the other words around them.
Exactly. And he suggests keeping a vocabulary notebook, where you write down all those new idioms and phrasal verbs you come across.
That's a good idea, like creating your own dictionary of all the confusing ones.
Exactly. It helps you remember them. Okay, so we've got idioms, phrasal verbs. Mr. Brooks also talks about this pronunciation thing that a lot of people don't even think about, but it's really important for sounding natural. It's called connected speech.
Connected speech. That's something I've noticed when listening to native speakers, but I never knew how to practice it. What is it exactly?
It's a way native speakers, kind of link words together in a sentence. Sounds blend, words shorten, things like that.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Instead of saying, I want to go, a native speaker might say, I want to go.
Oh, yeah. I hear that all the time. And it does sound much more natural than saying each word separately.
Right. Mastering connected speech is about noticing those little changes, those linking sounds, and using them yourself.
So how do you practice something like that? It seems so subtle, like something people do without even thinking about it.
Mr. Brooks has two main suggestions. First, really listen to how native speakers talk. Movies, TV shows, podcasts, real conversations, anything. Try to hear those linking sounds, how the words flow together.
So it's about training your ears first.
Yeah. And then try to imitate what you hear. Don't be afraid to experiment, to play around with those linking sounds. Practice makes perfect.
It's like teaching your mouth new ways to move. So are there any other, pronunciation secrets Mr. Brooks talks about?
He mentions intonation, the way your voice rises and falls when you speak.
Oh, the music of the language.
Exactly. And intonation can totally change the meaning of a sentence, even if the words are the same.
True. Like, just saying thank you can sound genuine or sarcastic depending on how you say it.
Exactly. And just like with connected speech, the best way to learn intonation is to listen to native speakers and try to copy them.
So we're tuning into all those subtle cues, how they express different emotions.
Yep. Now, Mr. Brooks also helps Lily with some more advanced grammar, like the subjunctive mood.
Subjunctive mood. That sounds a bit intimidating. What is that?
It's used for hypothetical situations, wishes, suggestions. It involves changing the verb a little bit.
Can you give it an example?
Sure. A classic one is, if I were you, notice how it's were instead of was.
Ah, I see. It creates that sense of, what if?
Exactly. The subjunctive mood can be tricky, but it makes your English sound more sophisticated. Mr. Brooks encourages Lily to find some resources that explain it and to try using it.
So we're going beyond the basic grammar rules and exploring the more nuanced stuff.
That's right. And the more comfortable you get with the subjunctive mood and other complex grammar, the more fluent you'll become.
This is great. It seems like Mr. Brooks is really good at breaking down all these different aspects of language learning. So what happens next?
He challenges Lily to keep expanding her vocabulary, but this time it's about learning words related to specific fields, areas she's interested in.
Oh, that makes sense. Once you've got the basics down, you can start focusing on your own interests, your career, stuff like that.
Exactly. Whether you're into business, technology, whatever, there are tons of specialized words to learn.
It's like becoming fluent in the language of your field. How does Mr. Brooks suggest tackling all those new words?
He tells Lily to read articles, journals, websites, anything related to her interests.
So immersing yourself in the language of your field.
Right. And he says to pay attention to key phrases, technical terms, all that jargon. Don't be afraid to look things up or ask for help if you're not sure what something means.
It's like becoming a student all over again, but this time it's in your specific area of interest. Are there any other techniques he recommends?
He tells Lily to use flashcards or make a glossary, and to try using those new words when she's writing or talking, just to really learn them.
So making them part of your active vocabulary, not just words you recognize.
Exactly. And the more you do that, the more confident you'll feel talking about those topics.
This is so helpful. It's clear that becoming fluent in English takes a lot of work, and it's great to hear all these specific tips from Mr. Brooks. So what's next in their conversation? What else does Mr. Brooks have to say?
That's a great question. And that's where we'll pick up in part 3. We'll explore how to stay motivated, how to deal with self-doubt, and how to really embrace this journey of learning English.
All right, we're back. I'm really curious to hear, what Mr. Brooks has to say in this last part of the conversation,
Yeah.
especially as Lily is getting closer to, what she considers fluency.
Yeah, in this final stage, Mr. Brooks tackles something that, well, a lot of language learners struggle with, staying motivated. Pushing through those times when you just feel like giving up.
Ugh, yeah, those moments when you hit a wall or get discouraged.
Mhm.
Totally been there. What does Mr. Brooks suggest? How do we deal with that?
He starts by saying, look, it's normal to feel unmotivated sometimes. You're not always going to be super excited to practice. Maybe you're tired, maybe you feel like you're not making progress.
It's like hitting that snooze button, but for language learning.
Exactly. And he's really big on being kind to yourself in those moments. It's easy to, beat yourself up when you feel stuck, but that's not going to help.
So self-compassion is key.
Yeah.
But okay, what can we actually do to stay motivated, to get back on track when we're feeling discouraged?
Mr. Brooks suggests like a shift in perspective. Instead of focusing on how far you still have to go, think about how far you've already come.
That's a good point. It's easy to forget how much progress you've made when you're always looking at what's still ahead.
Right. He tells Lily to, take a minute to think about her journey, remember how hard it was in the beginning, and celebrate how much she's learned.
Like remembering why you started in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he says to celebrate those little wins, too. Successfully ordering a coffee, understanding a podcast without subtitles, having a basic conversation with a native speaker.
Those little wins are so important.
They are. They keep you going. And he reminds Lily about setting those small goals, the ones we talked about earlier.
Right, breaking down that big goal of becoming fluent into smaller, more manageable steps.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between challenge and, actually being able to achieve those goals.
So progress, not perfection.
That's it. And he's really big on consistency. Even on those days when you don't feel like doing much, just doing a little something, reading an article, listening to a song, reviewing some vocab, it all adds up.
It's about building that habit of, being around English regularly.
Exactly. And he reminds Lily that learning a language, it's not just about rules and tests. It's about connecting with people, experiencing a new culture.
That's so true. It's not just the destination, it's the whole journey. So as Lily gets closer to what she thinks of as fluency, what does Mr. Brooks say?
He actually challenges her to think about, what fluency really means. It's not just about speaking super fast or never hesitating. It's about being able to express yourself clearly and feeling confident in different situations.
So being comfortable, being able to adapt, even in unexpected situations.
Exactly. And he tells her, look, it's okay to still get nervous sometimes or not be able to find the right word. It happens to everyone, even native speakers.
That makes me feel better.
The important thing is to keep practicing, to focus on communicating your ideas, even if your grammar or vocabulary isn't perfect.
So it's about the connection, not about being perfect.
Right. And he ends by asking Lily this really interesting question. What aspect of English or English-speaking culture are you most curious about?
I love that question. It's not just about mastering the language, it's about using it to explore and learn.
Exactly. It reminds us that language learning is this amazing journey. It connects us to the world, opens up new experiences and ideas.
This whole deep dive has been amazing. We got to hear all this practical advice, these mindset shifts, all through this cool conversation between Mr. Brooks and Lily.
And the main takeaway. Anyone can become fluent in English if they're willing to put in the effort. It's a journey with its ups and downs, but it's definitely worth it.
So if you take away one thing from our conversation today, let it be this. Learning a language, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Enjoy the process, celebrate your progress, and remember why you started in the first place.
And who knows, maybe you'll even discover some new passions along the way.
That's it for this deep dive. Until next time.